Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tathaastu. This week, we're going to talk to you about a wonderful movie which can act as the detox to all of the animal fever and the animal atrocities that we've seen through over the last week through the movie of Animal. The movie that I'm going to talk to you about and share my thoughts are about a wonderful movie called Parking. It's directed by a debutante director called Ramkumar. It stars HarishKalyan and MS Bhaskar in lead roles, along with an excellent cohort of supporting cast actors. I think this movie acts as a detox to Animal, primarily because it involves you in understanding what male ego is, shows you the consequence of that male ego, and thereby makes you realize that male ego is so fragile that at the point at which its fragility is touched, it becomes all-consuming. And that's something that this particular movie takes immense amount of time, even though it has a fairly short runtime of, I think, about 2 hours and 15 or 10 minutes. It takes intricate amount of time in explaining how minuscule acts of male ego being fragile and being acted upon, and that ego being tarnished, can lead to significantly large consequences by the minute, by the day, by the hour, and by the months, right? So when you see that in this movie, it's fairly a simple story. It's a story about a parking dispute that happens between two tenants who live in a duplex house. It's not a fairly big house, and therefore there's only parking space for just one car and one bike. The ego clash happens when the new car comes in. There is a small scratch that happens inadvertently, and this leads to tensions building up, which are largely caused by things that could just be resolved with a simple question of, hey, I know you did this. It's perfectly fine if you did this. I know it's a problem, but it's something that we can solve on our own. If it's a scratch, I think I can just pay for it. It should be fine. The fact that the person who is magnanimous tends to become more and more egotistical because of the fact that the other person just cannot hold a simple apology or thank you as just an apology or a thank you, but rather thinks of it as a tarnishment of their ego, leads to significant consequences in this particular movie. The consequences aren't just social, economic, maybe even political to some extent, but it is violent, and this violence is so much more potent than the harassing violence that you see in movies like Animal, right? The violence in this is subdued. The violence in this affects people, and you see the impact of that violence. It's not just blood, gore, and like bodies strewn around. The violence here is subdued. It happens realistically. The violence affects the individuals involved, i.e. the men whose egos are clashing against each other, their families, the impact of how this ego leads to individuals around them, i.e. the society, and how they start perceiving these two individuals. The fact that second-hand embarrassment is something that is to be taken so seriously because it's the men whose ego is being tarnished, right? This is the level of detail that this director has gone through, and kudos to the director. Obviously, yes, there are some flaws according to me in this movie. I think there are stretches in this movie where the believability of the escalations become that much more difficult to buy. I think there are some escalations that become very difficult for us to understand why they would like go to such an extreme in terms of just having that much of an ego. But I think the director probably wanted to hammer it home with regard to what this ego leads to and what the consequence of this ego is. So I do think that by the end of the movie, it's not just the messaging, right? It is the fact that there are two actors who literally live through their roles in this particular movie, arguing themselves out of the way to say, hey, we both have had an ego tussle, which has led to horrible consequences for both of our families, horrible consequences to both of us financially, economically, socially, and more importantly, mentally within our own peaceful relationships. That acknowledgement by two men at the end, I think that is picture perfect when it comes to this movie. So highly rate this, not just as a detox to animal and the kind of male hysteria, alpha maleism that's coming out, but I do think this movie forms a nice tonic for us to understand that intergenerational ego clashes, i.e., ones between a younger man and an older person and an older man, just intergenerational trauma that's associated to just ego bashing is something that can be avoided if they rely on two very important things: their own experiences in life and the fact that the other person is human, will tend to have some of the other issues that could trigger him, and be more understanding. By the end of this movie, I think the women are the ones who win because they show that they have the most maturity in the movie compared to the two men who just don't have it until the end. Absolutely wonderful to have this movie as my watch of the week. I hope you have fun watching this movie. Please do spare your time in liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. We try to post as much varied content as much as possible from our end. Myself and my wife are trying our best to do new things, at least to whatever extent we can. And we hope you have a great time listening to us. So thank you very much for your time, everybody, and have a wonderful week ahead. Bye-bye.
மாதிரி இவங்க எல்லாரையும் பார்க்கும்போது அவ்வளோ ரொம்ப என்ன சொல்றது, ரொம்ப இருக்கு. ஏன்னா படம் பண்றதே இந்த மாதிரி நீங்க எல்லாரும் தியேட்டர்ல பாக்குறதுக்கு தான். நீங்க என்ஜாய் பண்ணி பாக்குறத நாங்க பார்க்க போகும்போது அது ஒரு வேர்ட்ஸ்ல என்னால சொல்லவே முடியல.
Thank you, and we'll take a picture now.